Okay, so tonight we're talking about what's next now that you're graduating, and this is making the assumption that you're starting a job or working for some volunteer organization versus going on to college to work on a master's or further degree. Okay, we just need technology to cooperate here. All right. The topics that we'll cover today really just have to deal with relocating, getting to that organization that you're going to so that you can understand how the organization operates, taking a good look at the benefits that you may or may not be getting depending on what company that you're working for, how to be successful in your job when you get there, and then some tips on professionalism in the workplace. And my last slide's going to touch on the fact that people move on after they work someplace. It's not unusual for me to hear from alumni after they've been a year or two at a place and they already know that it's not a good fit and they're going to want to make a change. So I will address some of that as well. Once again, please ask questions if you have it. Now, for those of you who are relocating, there's some things that you want to think about in terms of cost of living and trying to determine what that cost of living is so you can build out the budget that you need for living in that area. Some good ways to learn about an area. Going Global has some city guides that will cover living there, the cost of living there. Realtor.com has a great resource for any given area where you can actually look at the security, the safety in the area, what are the crime rates. You can take a look at what amenities are in the area that you're choosing to live in. So these are some key services that I would look at. Take a look at where's the fire department, some of those support services that you are typically used to knowing where you currently live. And then my biggest suggestion is to make sure that you get active in the area. Of course, there's a lot of great apps that you can do that. I like Meetup, finding things that you like to do, but your Chamber of Commerce webpage will give you a very good view of what's happening in the city, both in activities and what is nearby. And I also like to check out any park districts. I know Ohio is great for that. And then the libraries will almost always have some kind of information about what is going on in the area and how to get connected. I do recommend check Flyer Connections. That's our alumni mentoring tool that we have for you to have access to. I would look and see, are there any alumni who are in the area that I'm going to? If you don't find it in Flyer Connections, you can most certainly find it through LinkedIn, through the alumni locator that is available there, and just sort on the city that you're going to. Any questions about relocating that you have currently? Anything that gives you concern or pause about moving to a new location? Okay, I know you've already probably relocated and coming to a college, but that's kind of a buffer area. Going to a new city can be a whole new adventure, but I hope you do look at it as an adventure. It's very exciting. Once you get to the organization that you're going to, they're going to probably have, hopefully, some kind of onboarding process. That might be in person, that might be some computer or a hybrid of both. And it should cover a lot of the topics that I have listed on this slide. If they don't, and you are going to get a copy of these slides so you can go back and refer to them because it is so content heavy. But if your onboarding process doesn't cover some of these topics, these are questions I would ask my supervisor that I'm working with, or maybe my coworkers. Go to the website. Sometimes you can find the information through your HR channels. They usually have a pretty good website, or at least some kind of employee guide. Those are the types of things that people, I mean, you get to your job and you're so busy getting started and you're just trying to meet everybody that you kind of forget about those little details. And there's so much information to be had in those employee guides. Do take the time to sit down. I mean, make it, part of your calendar if you need to, because it's really going to help you understand how the company operates, particularly what their policies are. They do change from company to company. So you really want to have a good handle on that. And if you can't find it, then always your supervisor is going to be the person that you will go to with the questions that you have. And part of the reasons this is important too, so many folks will start a job and they're so focused on what they do that they don't see how they fit into the bigger picture. And sometimes your efficacy and your job contentment has to do with what is the impact that I'm making. And so by understanding some of this, that's going to give you insight into that as well. Any questions about understanding the organization? And some of you may have already navigated some of this by doing internships or co-ops, but this is going to be like on a real level because you know it's not temporary. It's going to be a little bit longer. I'm going to go into the benefits now, and some of you may have already taken a job, so you know the benefits that you get, it's not like you're going to negotiate anything. But for others who are still job seeking, sometimes this is something you want to be aware of. There are certain benefits that are mandated by law. I have listed those on here with some high important points about how it affects you, like Social Security. That's actually going to come out of your pay, whereas unemployment, that's going to come from the employer and not out of your pay. But those are benefits that you're going to have if you hit a pandemic and get furloughed like I did. That unemployment suddenly becomes very important. So I'm very grateful that this is a legal requirement. Workers' comp, if you're going into, let's say, some kind of industry that's quite dangerous, a lot of times construction, workers' comp is going to be a very important part of that. And then the Family Medical and Leave Act. And I've put a pictorial up here that shows you the nations around the world that have paid maternity leave. And you're probably wondering, like, I'm just graduating, why are you showing me this? Well, you are all voters. And these are things that definitely come up in voting. And I just want you to be aware, because I was not, like, how bad it is that the US has 0 required paid. Now, some companies will pay and some will just give you the unpaid time off, but definitely know that we are lagging in the world in that area. And now we go into what are called discretionary benefits. So these aren't required. So this is going to be at the graciousness of the employer. And these change all the time. And these are the types of things when you hit a recession or you hit a pandemic and the company is trying to kind of make sure they stay afloat. These are the types of benefits that will probably get affected. Holidays will vary from company or organization. Government has a set one, whereas for-profits might be a little bit less than maybe what the government gets. Sick days, that is something that some companies have and some are going away from. I do encourage you to use those sparingly. You know, we talk about mental health wellness days. And so there's a tendency now for people to kind of just use their sick leave when they're like, oh, I really don't feel like going in today, I'm going to call in sick. And that isn't really the intent. The intent is for when you are truly sick, like you have the flu or something unforeseen happens. You really want to kind of save those days for those biggies, because if you run out of them, then you're going to be in an unpaid situation and you don't want that to happen. Of course, vacation, paid time off, that's definitely going to be one of those that vary. When you get there, you want to be aware of when do those start accruing? How can I use them? Can I use them before I've earned them? Some places will let you do that, others will not. And then also understand comp time. If you have a lot of overtime or you work late nights or weekends, does the company have a policy where you get compensated, or is it just expected that you're going to be paid that? Moving on to healthcare, this is a huge one, especially when you're in a pandemic, right? So understanding what those benefits are and what are the costs to you. Very often when you get there, you're going to have the choice between what type of plan you want to go into. And that choice is going to affect the cost that comes out of your pocket. And so when you think about the HMOs, those are usually going to be more cost effective for you, whereas the preferred provider option, the PPOs, will usually cost you more. You get to go pick your doctor at that point. But if you're in the HMO, there's going to be a designated list of doctors that you can go to. And so it just depends on how healthy are you and how important is it to you to be able to pick someone specific that you go to. Make sure you understand what expenses are covered and what the deductibles are. There's a lot of details to the health insurance. I've highlighted that when you get there, you're probably going to have an enrollment deadline. Make sure you're aware of that and make sure that you meet that before that deadline. Also know when are those enrollment periods and when can you make changes, because you can change that from year to year. Then I just touch on dental, vision, long-term care. You probably don't need long-term care at this point. That's something you'll look at when you're, in your 50s to your 60s. But dental and vision vary widely from company to company. Other types of insurance, I put a game board on here because really it is kind of gaming. Am I going to need this kind of insurance? So often these are ones that are offered. I do say on life insurance, you can probably get a better deal going outside of the company. But once again, those are things that you'll just weigh with your lifestyle and how worried are you. Anything else you would say on that one, Jason? Good.
No, I like how you've presented it and sort of the game board analogy regarding the choices and the research you have to do when it comes to that conversation.
Yeah. And I've changed that from year to year as well. Maybe some years I feel a little luckier than others. Or if you're trying to cut back and save money, historically, real life story, I've had that truly affect us where we had dropped it and I wish we had kept it, but you just never know. So it really is a gaming situation. Now we're talking about the really important part of your benefits that isn't salary, but it has to do with your retirement planning. And really retirement planning is, at some point you're going to want to quit working, and how are you going to sustain yourself after that? So these are all the things that go into that. 401ks and 403bs, that just depends on, what kind of institution that you're working for. But if your company has a matching, definitely put in to what they match. So you can max it. So that's basically money you're getting from the company. If you don't do that, then they won't match it. So you want to get that extra money. You get to dictate like how that money gets invested. So that's in your control. And you might want to take some financial classes on that. I mean, that's something I still kind of struggle with myself. It's a lot of information and it takes time to do when you're busy. So do make time for that, to get with some kind of financial planner so you understand that matching and how you can invest it to make it grow, help it grow. And it does save you on taxes as well. So that's always a beautiful thing. Pension plans. Now, when you start talking to your parents, pension plans used to be a really big deal and companies are kind of going away from it. Some might give you the option of the investment or the pension. You'll have to look at what % of your pay you can earn, but I would say a pension is better if you plan on staying at a place for a long time. But once again, you want to look at that growth that can happen with the other where you have more control over it. So that's going to be some math calculations right there. Make sure you get with someone to help you do that process. Profit sharing. I don't know if you guys saw Chevy Chase's National Lampoon's Vacation, Christmas Vacation. You remember the scene where he doesn't get the bonus at the end of the year? He's doing the swimming pool and he's really counting on that. So that's what the profit sharing is. Not all companies will have that. And as far as stock options go, I have some great TWA stock from when my husband worked there. It's pretty much worthless right now. So I don't know if you're working for Apple, stock would be great, but it just really, once again, kind of depends. Is there a question, Jason?
No, the chat topic was me inviting questions into the chat, and that's a good reminder. So for any students, these are really complicated topics, and it's an area that I hadn't really thought about until I was graduating from college. So we'd love to hear any questions because some of these really are complex concepts.
And you can kind of see my struggle in giving you enough information, but not trying to overload you at the same time. So hopefully I'm hitting that sweet spot. That's why I want you to ask questions if I'm not going deep enough. And feel free to say, Lisa, move on. You've killed it.
Oh, we do have one question.
Oh, great.
If you start working with a pension and 401k, will that continue even if they stop a pension program later on?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's happened with us previously. And so what happens when the pension stops is there is some kind of conversion that happens, and it usually converts into some kind of 401k. Now, when you're at one company, what you really want to look at, I didn't highlight this, but that time to vest, being vested in the money, and I'll use UD as an example. When I started, had I left anywhere between year 1 and 4 would have affected my amount of investment. So the first year I was vested 25%, 50%, 75, and then at the 4th year, 100%. So now I can leave Jason at any minute and take all that great money with me. So when you move, what happens is, and it kind of depends. See, I was 22 years military, and they had, you know, something that was similar to a 401k. TSP is what it was called, Thrift Savings Plan. I could keep it in there, or I could roll it over to a different plan or to my new company's plan. So I did keep it separate for a while, but it really didn't make sense to do that. Be cautious about who charges what on the maintenance of those plans. So at one point, I think I had 3 different plans going, and each one was, you know, I don't want to say skimming money off the top, but that's how it feels. You know, there's some administrative fees, and the percentages can change depending on who's managing it. So that's the piece I would really advise you to look for when that starts happening. But that's a great question. Did I answer the question? And is there another, Jason?
She said that you did answer the question, and we are all caught up on questions right now.
I think my computer's asleep. There we go. The last piece that I talk about here on the benefits, actually it's the second to last, is what are called employee services. So me working here at UD, I have great access to a health club. Of course, if I want to pay for it, some companies keep it included. Sometimes it's a little bit of a deduction. Employee assistance program, so that's like mental health help. You know, UD has a great one there. They do not well, yeah, we do have financial services on campus too, don't we? Food service, I have some place I can go eat. Childcare, we do have a place that's right next to the campus if I wanted to do that. So these are all benefits that may or may not happen, but they're nice to have if they're there. I will share something here that I heard once about it. I don't know if it was Apple or Microsoft, but out in California, they actually have a bus that will pick up their employees, and they are internet connected because the commute's so long. And you can like bring your pets to work. And I just want to point out that even though that sounds super great, that's all designed to keep you at work. So that work-life balance thing that will come up here in a little minute, sometimes the benefits are too good. And then reimbursements, money in your pocket. The big one is tuition. Some companies will pay for a master's or at least a percentage of. I've even seen before the pandemic where companies were doing a little bit of tuition payback. So if you have student loans, those are all things that you want to like look into and be aware of. Of course, business expenses if you're traveling for the company. Parking, I want to keep pointing out UD here, they do not reimburse us the parking. That's coming out of our pocket. You may get a cell phone, you may even get a car. My sister-in-law had both of those. So those are great benefits depending on where you're going. Now we're going to transition into being successful on the job. And I talk about the first 90 days, and the first 90 days is kind of a probationary period. That not all companies will have a official probationary period. Some may have official ones, and they may be longer than 90 days. They may be up to a year or more. But this is your time to really get in, learn the system, and give a great first impression. And so I've given a pictorial here of maybe some goal setting that you could do, what that would look like. But definitely get in, understand what your job description is and what your boss expects you to do. What's your evaluation system? There's usually some kind of performance review every year. What's that look like? What are they going to be evaluating you on? Get that right away so that you can make sure you're aware of that and you're working towards those goals. Make sure you're building the relationships, particularly with your boss, your coworkers, and whether it's someone who's above you or below you. Be social. If there's events that are going on, this is your time to get in there. They're going to be looking, is the new person coming or not? And I do give a caution about limit drinking, because even if everyone else is drinking, you still want to be totally in control, because it is still a work situation and people are still watching and assessing how you're fitting into the culture there. Be very consistent and always being respectful. These are things you know. Some of this might feel like repeats, like, yeah, Lisa, I know that. But I say them because they are so important on making that first impression. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's the biggest thing that I see is people want to appear like, oh, they're getting it right away, but they really do have questions. Make sure you're writing things down, because if you're brave enough to ask the questions, and then you don't write it down and you have to ask the same question, particularly the same person again, that's going to be very frustrating. So make sure you do that. Keep things clean and organized. That will really help set the tone. And know who is who. Get an organization chart and how are people connected to each other. You can use LinkedIn to do a little bit of research on those that you're working with. So once you have that going, once I have my computer going, there we go. I talk a little bit about some missteps, things you want to be staying away from. It's one thing to be confident. It's another thing to come across as though you already have all the answers. So be congenial. You're there to learn. Make the assumption you're going to learn something from everybody. And then your knowledge will shine through. Definitely on the schedule, even if other people are leaving early, you don't want to set that tone. Really make sure that you're coming in early and not coming in late, not leaving early, that type of thing. Office drama, it happens everywhere. We are aware of that. Don't get involved with it. Just stay out of it. Be careful about being bored or disengaged. Even if you're not clicking with the job yet, find something that you can connect to, that you can be excited about it. You know, I'm a person, you know, they talk about office politics, and I consider myself, I'm not an office politics person. And you can be that way, but you still need to be aware that they're there, because it informs you on how you navigate. So really understanding the culture is an important part. And not feeling, even if you feel overwhelmed, you don't want to just be saying, oh, I'm so overwhelmed all the time. That's not going to set the impression that you want to leave with it. Any questions there? Once again, these are all pretty logical, but it's good to just see it as a reminder as you move forward. Now, this is a chart. I debated on putting this in here, but the reason I put it in is it really encompasses all the components of professionalism. We don't have the time to talk about all of them today. So I'm going to talk about definitely communication and conduct in the workplace, but there's a balance. There's a balance to everything, you know, especially when it comes to your quality of work, depending on the deadline, how much time you have to do it. How do you do on your output? If conditions are favorable versus adverse conditions. So these are all things that I want you to be aware of in terms of how people feel comfortable around you, whether it's a client or coworkers, and how you're interacting and really what your character is. So going right into professional communication, this is a slide definitely that could be an entire 1-hour presentation. And I'm just going to hit on some key topics, particularly drawing your attention to the fact that everybody has a communication style. It's not right or wrong, it's just different. And as a great team, you really want all those different communication styles, because that is truly what will make an organization run well. The sooner you're aware of what your own style is and what everyone else's style is, and how can you better communicate with the individuals on your team, the better you will perform. I give the example of the DISC, but you've heard of the MBTI probably, and there's a lot of different other assessments that are out there. Start playing around with that if you haven't already done one in class, just to bring your awareness to that. And then as you communicate, make sure you're managing up. And what that means is communicating with your supervisor, staying within the chain of command, like don't jump over your boss to go 1 or 2 levels up because, you know, you think whatever. So it's important to keep everyone in the know that's in your chain of command. In terms of when do I use a conversation versus I can email it or just place a phone call, really that has to do with the content. The face-to-face, you definitely want to save that for if there's a lot of people who are involved and there needs to be a lot of voices at the table. If there's anything contentious, it's better to do that face-to-face. Email you can use if you don't need an answer right away. You typically give people 48 hours to respond to an email, so you know you're not pressed for time. And you don't want emails really to be more than 3 paragraphs. Sometimes people will put a lot of content into an email, and that's just too much. People don't want to read them. You've probably experienced that yourself. And then save the phone call for when you need a quick turnaround time. Pay attention to body language. If you're not aware of nonverbals, if your arms are crossed, the way your face, you know, if you're looking stern or quizzical, these are all things that you want to be aware of. In your email, make sure you're being professional. You still want to use spell checker. You still want to use an intro, a salutation. And once again, make sure you keep them pretty brief. Phone call, just make sure on the phones that you are setting your voicemail, particularly at work, especially when you're away, for both voicemail and email. Be aware of how to answer the phone. Are you putting in the organization's name? And when you're placing the calls, who are you calling on behalf of? Particularly if you're taking a message for someone else. And I do also say if someone calls and they've called the wrong office, you know, don't just tell them tough luck. Do take the time because it is representing the entire company to try to help them figure out what number they should be calling. Okay, that's it on talking the talk. I want to draw your attention also to international communication, global fluency. Many of you may be working with companies that are global companies. Maybe there's several people from different countries that are on the team. Maybe your client is from another culture. And so the Lewis model really speaks to, and it's not to stereotype, but it is to say based on different areas of the world is where people give their focus on whether they're very task-oriented or very people-oriented. And the graph on the left just really shows if I have a team of 4 people from 4 different countries, depending on how we're communicating, building trust, setting schedules even, can really affect what's happening on that team. So I want you to be aware of that so you can take that into account and go learn more based on who you're working with. Just a little bit about professional conduct. This is one of those that I don't like doing because I think everybody pretty much knows this. But the reason it's on here, because, you know, I was a supervisor for 20 years. These are the things that always got people in trouble. Seriously, doing, you know, shopping During your lunch hour, using the computer at work, that's a big no-no. People not dedicating the time to work, giving inappropriate jokes, sending inappropriate emails, the content isn't professional. Alcohol use, both on and off work. I think everything else on there, dishonesty, all that stuff is things that can happen. So I just don't want you to fall victim to that. And you may be affected by it. Someone else is doing it, and we'll address that here as well. Jason, it's a computer day. There we go. All right, this is one of my favorite slides. And I talk about cubicle etiquette, and we're now virtual, in a pandemic, so some of this might be stuff you would see in my background if I didn't have the green screen in the back. But when we are back in person, I put emphasis on this slide because when I talk about people living together 8 hours, 9 hours, 10 hours a day, this is what drives people insane. And I have seen every bit of this when you're living in community, of people not paying attention to how they're affecting others, whether they talk loud, particularly when they pick up the phone, or they have music playing that someone else can't stand, sitting there chewing on chips and the person's chewing too loud. Bodily functions, yeah, it happens. Like, you gotta, take that to another room. Social time, catching up in the morning. Some people are very serious about getting right to work, and they don't want to hear how your weekend was as you're talking to somebody else. So there's a nice balance between being social and being professional. And so I bring all these up and give you some funny photos as well, so that you're mindful of that, even to the point of what you put up on your walls. How is that going to affect somebody else? That's what you want to think about. Then just some notes on professional etiquette. This is another one that could be an entire hour slide. But do know that during meetings, being on your phone and not being engaged with the people in the meeting is a big no-no. That's probably the biggest one that I see anymore. The desk etiquette, strong odors. So if you're very heavy on perfume, or maybe we had an issue with someone bringing in fish. I think the entire office complained about that for an entire day. So you will really want to think about consideration of others. Keep your phone, if you even bring it, on silent mode for sure. Be very careful about relationships in the workplace. This is the worst one I think I see, is you think it's wonderful when you go into a relationship, but when it's people you work with, it can derail the entire team if that relationship goes south. So I say avoid it, honestly. Now, if the heart just isn't going to abide by that, then make sure you're following policy. Make sure that you're not, the public display of affection, because that truly does affect the integrity of the team when they feel like there's favoritism there or other things that can happen. Do be responsive to both emails and voicemails. Always respect others. Be careful about blaming others, like throwing people under the bus. You don't want to do that. And you would think I wouldn't have to put this about don't take without asking, but seriously, people eating other people's food in the refrigerator has constantly been an issue everywhere I've worked. I can't even imagine eating somebody else's food, but it's happened. And then if there's any dining situations, if you're not up on dining etiquette, you can go look up more for that. Any questions? I'm going to take a pause breather here.
Nothing in the chat currently, although, we're a small group. Feel free to either type or come off mute, and we'd be thrilled to address your questions or concerns.
Okay, so this is the slide that I mentioned earlier about what do I do when others are not professional? Okay, and you notice I put not if, but when. You are going to see unethical behavior. whether it's a safety issue, people not following safety policies, discrimination, harassment. I even put cleanliness on here. I once heard a story about somebody who just refused to bathe ever, and the supervisor tried to talk to the person, wouldn't do it. It was a union situation. The person was in the union got involved, and they couldn't make a person do, and so everyone else around them who had to work in those conditions, it became very hostile. And so what do I do when someone else is not being professional? You really want to make sure you understand your company's policy. Always do try to keep it at the lowest level. Try to go directly to the person that you have a concern over. Sometimes it's someone you care about, it's someone you respect. It could be a lack of awareness on their part. So maybe just you educating them will help solve the problem. But I do provide the slide that you can come back and look at later that talks about what they call the whistleblower, when you do need to report something. And it really helps you think about at what level do I go forward and really bring a discipline's attention. Any questions on this one? Because this is kind of a, one we don't want to think about. Okay, hopefully you can feel close enough with the people that you work with that you will be able to move forward with any kinds of issues. There's going to be some reporting mechanism. Typically, working with your HR will probably be your supervisor. If it's about your supervisor, then you're looking at HR. And Jason, maybe this is one you want to weigh in on since you have a bit more experience in this.
Well, I think it depends upon the type of organization. So yeah, for the most part, if you're working in a business setting, I would say that the HR department is probably going to be the place to go. There are some groups that might have an ombudsperson who is a safety line where you can go and have your concerns addressed. Within the higher education world, there are different structures in terms of honoring Title IX and other forms of discrimination where there's an office set up just to address concerns. So typically groups that you will be working with are going to have an outlet for you. It may be a matter of asking and navigating who the right person to go to is. And to echo what Lisa said, if possible, I think it's always best to address things locally first. But then if that doesn't work out, typically there are ways of addressing concerns on a larger level.
And then my last slide before I go into resources is really about moving forward. How do I make that transition from this job that I've already accepted and I'm starting? And so some key things is for you to make sure you stay engaged in your profession and continue to maintain that network, especially like on LinkedIn, as you meet people, as you go to meetings, you go to conferences, you meet new clients, because the biggest thing that I see, and we do work with Alumni for Life, is people will be very comfortable in their job thinking, this is great, I'm going to be here for a long time. And then something happens that's out of their control. A company downsizes, a divorce happens, a relocation. There's a lot of things that they didn't plan on that suddenly they're now a job seeker and they're not ready for it. And it's almost like starting from ground zero. So I don't want you to ever start from ground zero. If you feed and cultivate that network, that'll be there for you. That's the intent of it. Make sure you're updating your resume at least annually. If you have that performance review, that's a good time to do that. Or maybe when you finish a big project, maybe you'll make it quarterly, but I would not do it any less than annually because you start to forget what you've done. You want to make sure you know what your impact is, that you're putting quantified bullets, on those resumes and keeping it up to date. I do indicate it's easier to get a job when you have a job. Now, that being said, I've had people quit their job because they were so incredibly unhappy. That might happen. So things you want to ask yourself, can I afford to do this? How long can I do it for? What is my opportunity before I go do that? If you maintain your job and you are going to make a move, whether it's a career move, meaning I want to switch companies, or maybe I want to shift roles, or I want to shift industries, you're going to have to start researching those opportunities and reaching out to people. This is definitely a networking situation. Every job search hereafter is going to be very different from the one you're conducting out of college, because you can't always be above board about it. You may or may not want your supervisor to know that you're making that shift. It depends on the level of trust, and are they there for your growth? So sometimes your boss will be very supportive, and you're lucky if you're in that situation. And then other times you may not want them to know, and you're going to be doing it very quietly, and that's how that's going to happen. Is there a question in the chat, Jason?
No, you referenced Flyer Connection twice, so I put the link in the chat so that students could click if they wanted to see or learn more about that resource.
Nice. You will have a box, usually in applications, that says, is it okay if we reach out to your current employer? And so if you've had that conversation with your employer, then your answer is yes. If you've not had that conversation with your employer, then your answer is no. Anything else you would say about that piece, Jason?
No, you covered that well, and that that can sometimes be a delicate situation that you need to reflect upon what the best thing to say or do is. Is your supervisor supportive of your own career journey, or might you talking about this with her or him be a risk for your job security?
And really planning that departure with class is such a good idea. You don't want to burn bridges. You don't want to leave people abandoned. You hope that the good work that you have just figured out and you have done will carry with you, so you can use these people as referrals, which you're going to need. So that's my best advice. But there are situations where the culture is just that bad, or the supervisor is just that bad. I understand it. So it's not always going to be in your control, but if it's in your control, leave with class, give them the notice, have an exit plan where you transition the work, and you're very, very professional about it. A common question I get is, how long do I have to stay in this job? The general guidance is 2 years, but I've seen people leave before that. Definitely the instance, I was mentioning where the person was so frustrated they were crying in my office about it. That was under a year that they had been there, but there was a lot of misrepresentation about the amount of travel and that type of thing. So yeah, you can go at any time, but 2 years is the general guidance.
Lisa, just to provide a time check, it's about 4:45.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
That's perfect, because we're going to have time for questions at the end. Hope you guys have them already. So these are some resources, and what I'm going to do is, when we end here, I will email you this presentation, because I'll have everyone's email, that you can go and get additional information on some of the topics that I've discussed today. And then a little bit about career services and what we provide. Hopefully this has been helpful today. And if you want more assistance with any other topics that are currently happening in your life, you are very welcome to make an appointment with us through Handshake. And that is the end.